changing faster than faster than people can cope. So it's creating more vulnerability. Now we see longer dry spells or heavier rainfalls. Like in Kenya, where I come from, you can split the country into two. The northern half is really suffers from long droughts or very biting droughts. Now, when there's no drought, then there are very severe floods. In western parts of Kenya, we have perennial floods, which people can no longer predict anymore.
More cyclones will be generated, and they will be generated earlier in the season, and they will be also generated further south, further away from the equator.
Climate change is no longer just a possibility. It is happening everywhere. A recent study by the British charity Oxfam reports that the number of people affected by climate-related disasters will rise by over 50% in the next 5 years. The Global Humanitarian Forum, a think tank run by Kofi Annan, estimates that climate change is responsible for 300,000 deaths every year, and that this number could grow more than twofold by 2030. There are two types of responses to counter the climate crisis: mitigation of the effects and adaptation to change. Since 2000, when the Kyoto Protocol was adopted, CO2 emissions have not decreased. On the contrary, they have continued growing, and climate change has accelerated its pace. To mitigate climate change, our governments should have acted much sooner and more aggressively. As a result, human beings are now left with essentially one option: adapt.
For many centuries, people have adapted to the physical climate in which they find themselves. I think this is just happening so rapidly now that people struggle to keep up. That they are also probably finding themselves in a situation where they're not quite sure how exactly do they go about to adapt. What would the future hold? If they adapt, let's say, just agricultural practices, today, in 5 years' time, what new adaptation do they need to do? And I think that's uncertainty where people are very cautious, because in many cases this is the livelihood of many communities.
The process of adaptation will not only affect poor countries, it will have an impact on rich countries too. Since 1999, the NATO military alliance has been developing strategies to deal with the new phenomenon of environmental security. In April 2009, the European Union has further integrated its approach for adaptation to climate change. According to the EU, climate change will bring longer and drier summers, leading to more use of air conditioning, thereby creating heavy temporary demand for electricity. 1 billion people may be forced to move between now and 2050, in a dire global crisis with more far-reaching consequences than the aftermath of World War II. Floods are already Europe's costliest natural catastrophe, but a more devastating long-term threat is the complete collapse of the Greenland ice sheet, which would cause a 7-meter sea level rise, thus destroying major cities like London and Amsterdam.